Yeah, I think, I mean, as we wrote a series of basic programs to do as you say, to kind of interpret this thing as a maze, and the first order of business once a maze is stabilized is to kind of figure out, well, what does it mean to walk it? Like if this is a maze, then those things are walls, these diagonal lines, but what makes something actually be a wall, right? And so then, and that becomes, and it turns out there are like different and distinct ways to interpret those things as walls. And so then then you can make these commitments in code and actually see a little walker move around the maze. And that gave to me, I felt like there was almost this like pseudo-tactile sense to it then, that you could like run your finger over it in a way and kind of feel the labyrinthine nature in a way that you couldn't really when you're looking at it without a walker, without something that's really kind of realizing the walls as walls. And then from there, it was a relatively small step to say, okay, let's try to do exhaustive searches from the left hand, from every starting point on the left-hand point to every starting point on the right-hand side. And if you can get there, then it actually has a start and an end, and you could call it a maze. Because most of these patterns that pop up, if you just randomly start walking in some, they're big cycles. And there's all these interesting cycles. And so you can do, and I think Noah was doing these kind of reachability colorings to kind of show the regions that constitute, because some of the cycles are quite complicated.
You can solve it with flood fill.
Yeah. And so, but yeah, I thought that whole, I did find the discussion around those programs to be really interesting, because it sort of ended up really pushing on kind of the semantics of maze and mazeness, and forcing explicit sort of formulations to commitments for different notions of wall, different notions of maze.
I mean, to me, it just shows that the idea of like, is there a path from one side to the other? Is an irrelevant question by itself. But the fact that you can operate on the pattern that you have up here as if it were a maze to determine that question is answered yes or no. I mean, that by itself demonstrates that you treat it like a maze. I actually think cognitively, like when you show the pattern to people, I don't know, maybe not Casey, but most people, I think they look at the pattern and they think of a maze. And so it is something that the way you receive it, is whether or not it has a solution. That's nevertheless what people are thinking about. They're not thinking about the grid system in Manhattan.
But that was the interesting contrast then, because Casey said, I don't care whether it's a maze.
Right.
And then he wrote a whole set of computer programs which really emphasize a different aspect of it.
Yes. Yes.
Right?
Yes.
And those weren't about mazeness. And
That's
so
right.
that was you start with just the first step of your interpretation, what is this? You end up writing another set of code that emphasizes a different aspect that's still in there, but it's just your first step actually takes you in an entirely different direction.
Yeah.
Yeah, I thought that was really cool.
Yeah, I think what Warren says there is interesting, because it's easy to assume that everybody looks at it and like thinks a maze, but like I didn't think that, and Casey didn't think that. So I'm wondering, like, do you guys like? I could see some ways that you could do some like testing to see, I don't know, whether people are actually thinking of it as a maze or not.
Yeah.
Some sort of like, I don't know, first glance fMRI or something.
Well, I mean, the thing about that is like, what striking result might arise from our testing? This is the thing I imagine, because, I mean, it's true that when you show people, whatever you show them, it may be something you're like, oh, that looks like a forest. Oh, it looks like jackpot, whatever else. People could think different sorts of things. And, I mean, what would interest me is if there were different interpretations that opened up some new perspectives on how we studied it and how we, but the sort of, it's sort of like Google fight, like maze versus pattern, or something like this. I mean, so what?
But certainly in the cultural situation in which the program was being produced, it was the conversation around it was sort of about mazes, and this is a maze
bunch
generator.
of game designers are going to see a maze, but a bunch
Right.
of quilters might see a
Right. Exactly.
Yeah,
But I guess,
and I mean, it's interesting. Yeah, the print sources use the term maze consistently, but it's I mean, so I think undeniably, like, an interesting aspect of the program is that viewers of it, many of them, if not universally, you know, relate it to the maze and see that it's a maze. But that's, and then, you know, where to go from that? Well, there are many, many directions.
So, I know you said you haven't tried to track down the original author and the original manuscript and so on, but obviously you've done some research in how it was propagated and sort of, you know, where people encountered it and the different versions of it exist. Could you talk a little bit about sort of what kinds of, you know, research into that distribution you've done and why those and not others?
Yeah, that's not, that hasn't been concluded, really.
Okay.
That, we have concluded a few things, right,
Uh-huh.
in work that we've done so far, but that we've found, you know, some print sources. So I'm not sure. I mean, I don't think there are any of us who really intend to sort of look deeply ethnographically into the way that people may have received this program, or like talk to people and find out if they know about it, do a large scale study or something like that. This is a program that does come up repeatedly. It's in the it is in the manual for the most, you know, the best-selling computer,
Right.
single model of computer, right? But at the same time, I mean, we don't want to overstate its influence in that it wasn't like, you know, Michael Jackson's, you know, Beat It or something. I mean, it wasn't like everyone. This wasn't something that like everyone was, you know, trading in tin print, you know, and talking about it and running it on computers like all over the place, right? So I mean, the program is an interesting text for us to look at, an interesting piece of code, but we're not saying it's like a massive, you know, cultural phenomenon. There was a noticeable cultural phenomenon of people creating, recalling, exchanging, writing, you know, one-line computer programs. And so we're certainly looking into that more broadly.
My question is sort of similar, but you sort of just said that you don't have any evidence about how people used it. But to me, Michael's comment was interesting because from a computer science perspective, this is a program that generates an infinite amount of maze or whatever pattern. But when people actually use it, they press Control-C at some point, right?
Yeah. Well, they can.
So
Shut off the computer, close the emulator. There might be some that are still running.
So I guess I'm interested, do you have anything to say about how people interacted with it as an artifact?
Well, as I said, I mean, I think one of the things is people are explicitly invited to make modifications to the program.
Right.
In the text that we saw, they're invited to add this color switching, right? And in the user's guide, they're invited to change, as I did, the way that basically the least significant digit of that, you know, 205.5, and see what the new distribution looks like. So I suspect, I mean, without having hard evidence, I suspect that people, I mean, there is hard evidence that people shared it with each other and said it was cool. That's what was printed in Run magazine. Somebody did that, you know, that is an example of that, right? And I think people did that in other contexts where they're, you know, using computers at school or other places. And I think that they learned more about how computing worked and also about sort of just the aesthetic possibilities of the computer.
So unless someone has a burning final question, we are officially over time, and I would suggest that we thank Nick.